Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, good evening, good evening, everybody. My name is Nelson E. Brown, and you are listening to the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I'm very happy that you all have had the opportunity once again to sit down and speak with me about subjects that matter from the perspective of the young black male. Now, I'm very, very happy to have a special guest tonight. So tonight, I'm going to have my very own professor, Professor Dann Malihom. He's one of the professors in the sociology department at UMBC, which is where I studied sociology as a student. And he's going to be talking to us about the sociology of education. So I had the chance to take this course last fall, and I really enjoyed it, and I did well in the course, and I learned a lot about the sociology of education, which is one of the courses that he facilitates, and it's one of the courses that he teaches at UMBC. So as a sociology student, I thought that it was best for me to bring on a professor from the sociology department to actually speak to you guys to talk about what sociology is, and from this point of view, what the sociology of education is. Now, we all know about the field of education, but a lot of people don't really understand the ins and outs in terms of what it takes to dive into different dimensions of education. So that's why I think it's very important for us to sit down and actually speak with a sociology professor who specializes in that field and within that specific area, so that we can have a better understanding and develop a better concept of what is really taught in this course. Now, he's going to be joining us for the second half of the program. So he's going to be joining us for the second half of the show from 6:30 to 7. But I will be facilitating the show for the first half from 6 to 6:30. And I pulled some notes and some stats from the internet and from my research about the sociology of education. And I wanted you guys to have an opportunity to learn more about the sociology of education. So when he hops on, he's going to introduce himself, and he's also going to have an opportunity to speak about the work that he does at UMBC and how he's been able to navigate through the coronavirus pandemic as an educator. So this is my very first time having one of my professors from college on my show. So he agreed to come on, and I'm very excited about the fact that he agreed to come on so that he can share his expertise with you guys. Now, I'm going to take care of a few housekeeping things before I begin. Now, next week is November 23rd, Tuesday, November 23rd, 2021. So I will not be having a show next week. Next week is Thanksgiving week. I'm going to be off next week I'm going to be taking a break. So I'm going to be on a hiatus for next week. So there is going to be no show next week. So if you hop on the broadcast, if you hop onto the show and you see that I'm not here, it's because I am off. So I just want to remind you guys that, next week on November 23rd, 2021, next Tuesday, I will not be here with you guys. I will be taking a break, and I will be on a hiatus, my Thanksgiving break from school and from facilitating my radio show. I think it's really, really nice to just take a break every now and then, and also to spend some time with my family and to just exhale and take a mental health break, which is something that we all need, especially during these times. So I just wanted to clear that up in the beginning of the show before we dive right into the subject at hand. So when we talk about the sociology of education, we have to think about it from different dimensions. But when we talk about the sociology of education, we need to figure out what exactly it is. And according to sources, it says, a lot of the sources that I've pulled and that I've researched say that the sociology of education is the study of the relationship between society and education. But it also states that the sociology of education refers to the study of how the individual experience in public institutions can affect education and its outcomes. It concerns the system of public schools of modern industrial societies, and it also includes the expansion of higher adult and continuing education. I think, we talked about him in class. August, I'm trying to pronounce this right, Comte, C-O-M-T-E. I think that's right. But he is called the father of psychology. But the individual experience that we learn about gets is that a person gets can be from the family, friends, society, and all other people with whom the person interacts with. The public institutions that we talk about when we discuss the sociology of education that affect the education of a person can be a school, a college, a place of work, or in any institution in any capacity. Now, the sociology of education aims to study how social elements have an effect on schools and individuals, and to acquire knowledge about democratic ideologies and to help create curricula that will best meet each child's need and cater to their personalities and to their development. The sociology of education, sources say, is an important, optimistic, and fundamental aim characterized by the inspirations of or for a betterment and progress of the learning environment. It means that it is a means of improving the standards of education and in turn helping the young generation achieve a greater quality of life. The sociology of education is recognized as a place where there is an opportunity for the students to learn and develop unique skills that they need and have the potential for. It is not only beneficial for children, but also for young teens and older adults as well. So I want to stop right there for a second so that we can actually unpack that a little bit and let's just first talk about what it means to be a sociologist. Now, for those of you who don't know what a sociologist is a person who studies society and social behaviors, and they do that by examining the groups, the cultures, the organizations, the social institutions, and the processes that develop when people interact and work together. So that's what sociologists do. So they could design research projects to test theories about social issues. They can collect data through surveys, observations, interviews, and other sources. They can analyze and draw conclusions from data. They can prepare reports, articles, and presentations detailing their research findings. And they also can collaborate with and advise other social scientists, policymakers, and other groups on research findings and sociological issues. Now, again, they study human behavior, interaction, and organization. But sociologists also observe the activity of social, religious, political, and economic groups, organizations, and institutions. They examine the effects of the social influences that stem from the organizations and the institutions on different individuals and separate groups. But they also trace the origin and the growth of these groups and interactions. So an example could be that they may research the impact of a new law or a policy on a specific demographic. And they also use quantitative and qualitative methods when they conduct research, and they frequently use statistical analysis programs during the research process. So their research may help administrators, educators, lawmakers, and social workers solve problems and formulate public policy. So oftentimes when we think about sociologists, we have to think about people who specialize in certain range of social issues. So sociologists per se may specialize in a wide range of special topics, including education and health, which is education is one of the topics for the night, crime and poverty, families and population, and gender, racial, and ethnic relations. So we also know that there are sociologists who specialize in crime, who also may be called criminologists or penologists, excuse me. These workers apply their sociological knowledge to conduct research and analyze the penal systems and populations and to study the causes and the effects of crime. So again, when we talk about the sociology of education, we have to talk about it from not just from an educational standpoint, but we have to refer to different strategies and research methods from a sociological perspective. And that's what sociologists do. So many people with sociology backgrounds become post-secondary teachers and high school teachers, and most others find work in related jobs outside the sociologist profession. So policy analysts, survey researchers, statisticians, and demographers are some of the many examples of fields that they dive into. Now, in order to become a sociologist, many sociology jobs require a master's degree or a PhD. Many bachelor degree holders find positions in other related fields like social services, education, and public policy. Now, the sociologists, again, they typically need a PhD and a master's degree, but there are two types of sociology master's degree programs: the traditional programs and the applied, clinical, and professional programs. Now, these traditional programs prepare students to enter into a PhD program. Applied, clinical, and professional programs prepare students to enter into the workplace, and it teaches them the necessary analytical skills to perform all of the sociological research that they need in a professional setting. So having a career and building a career as a sociologist is very rewarding once you have time to actually pursue your education and to follow through and to just dig deep into a lot, learning about the social issues that exist and figuring out how to solve problems with your influence and with the work that you do on a daily basis as a sociologist. So that's something that we all have to keep in mind, and that's something that we'll learn about more in detail in the next 20 minutes. So some other experiences that sociologists can have could consist of candidates holding a bachelor's degree. They oftentimes, I should say, benefit from having internships or volunteer work when they're looking for entry-level positions in sociology or some related field. So these types of opportunities give students a chance to apply their academic knowledge in a professional setting and develop skills for the needed field. So some of the important qualities that a sociologist is supposed to have is that, some of them are analytical skills. So analytical skills are essential when you want to become a sociologist, because in order to do that, and in order to study sociology in general, you must be able to examine data and other information using statistical methods in order to test the theories. You have to have good communication skills. So that's another important quality to have as a sociologist, because strong communication skills are needed to conduct interviews, collaborate with colleagues, and you also need good communication skills to write and present research results. Now, critical thinking skills, they're the top three skills. So we have analytical skills, communication skills, and critical thinking skills. So critical thinking skills are the third most important quality to have, because sociologists spend a lot of their time designing research projects and collecting, processing, and analyzing information to draw logical conclusions about society and various groups of people. So these are all of the things that we have to keep in mind when we think about pursuing careers as sociologists, and when we think about specializing in a specific field within the world of sociology. We have to keep all of this in mind, because if you don't really know how to demonstrate great qualities, important qualities, it's going to be very difficult to pursue a career such as sociology, because it's very abstract. It's not really black and white. It requires you to think outside the box. And I think that that's why I enjoy taking this course, taking courses within the sociology department. And that's why I think I enjoy being a sociology student. I love thinking outside the box, and I love learning about things that are abstract, even though it may be challenging sometimes. I enjoy learning about social issues, and I enjoy learning about what's wrong. And I love the fact that I can figure out how to resolve problems that exist. So I think that that's why I was drawn to sociology during my young adult years, pursuing my career and with attending college. And it's something that I can make a great career out of. I think that that's what drew me, and that's what attracted me to this major. And that's what I'm getting my second degree in. So when we also think about a sociologist, we have to remember that they can work in a wide variety of settings. So they typically work in an office, but they also may work outside of an office setting when they're conducting research through their interviews or observations. And they can even conduct research and present research results. And they most likely will work on a full-time basis during regular business hours. So that's something that I think is very important for people to understand as well. So when we talk about the sociology of education, I did manage to pull an article from the American Sociological Association about the sociology of education, which is what we're going to discuss in about 30 minutes or so. And it's called The Embeddedness of Teachers' Social Networks, Evidence from a Study of Mathematics Reform. So this is an article about the sociology of education that was released a few years ago, so several years ago actually, and it talks about how to examine the world of education and how to create ideas and methods to figure out how to, in order to figure out how to articulate that to students and the people who are learning from that. So it starts off by saying that the teacher's social networks within the education system can play an important role in teacher learning and organizational change. But what influences teacher networks is the question that's on the table. And it also asks, why do some teachers have networks that are likely to support individual and organizational change while others do not? And the study is a first step in answering this question. And we have to focus on how district policy influences the quality and the configuration of teachers' social networks. We draw a longitudinal qualitative study of implementation of a mathematics curriculum in 4 schools. So this is what they use as an example to try to get their point across. And they show that the district policy shaped the tie formation process. Again, this is an example that they use, influencing the structure of networks, the mobilized resources that teachers subsequently accessed via their networks, influencing the benefits accrued through network exchanges, and introduced interaction routines that interrupted conventional ways that teachers talked together. And they also were able to uncover unexplored facets of network formation and change, and they were also able to provide insight into the dimensions of social networks that are amenable to outside intervention. So again, this is just an example of what they used in the education system within this passage in order to test theories and in order to measure how effective things were or how ineffective they were. And that's something that we just have to keep in mind when we think about pursuing a career in sociology, or when we think about the sociology of education from a broad standpoint. So the Sociology of Education course, like I said, I took it last year. I took it last fall with Mr. Malihom, with Professor Dann Malihom, and I really enjoyed the course because I think that it definitely opened my eyes to what really goes on behind the scenes in the world of education and in the world of academics from the teacher standpoint and not just the student standpoint. I think that when we talk about the sociology of education, we have to think about how diverse it is as a subfield that features theories and research that's focused on how education as a social institution is affected by and how it affects other social institutions and the social structure in general, and how so many social forces shape the policies, the practices, and the outcomes of the schooling process. Even though education is typically viewed in most societies as a pathway to personal development, success, and social mobility, and as a cornerstone of democracy, sociologists who study education, like Professor Malihom, take a critical view of these assumptions to study how the institution actually operates within the society. And they consider what other social functions education might have. So for example, socialization into gender and class roles, and what other social outcomes contemporary educational institutions might produce, like reproducing class and racial class, among others. So I'm not going to give you a whole history lesson about the sociology of education. I'm going to leave that to the professor, but There are many theoretical approaches within the sociology of education that I encourage you all to dig deep and learn more about. But I just want to say that the sociologists who work from this perspective also assert that educational institutions in in school curricula, again, this all stems from the notes that I collected. The school curricula are products of the dominant worldviews, beliefs, and values of the majority, which typically produces educational experiences that marginalize and disadvantage those in the minority in terms of their race, their class, their gender, their sexuality, and ability, among other things. But by operating in this fashion, the educational institution is involved in the work of reproducing power, domination, oppression, and inequality within society. So these are all of the things that happen. These are all of the events that transpire while we talk about the sociology of education. I think that it's so much that we're exposed to when we think about the sociology of education, because it provides us with that foundation. It provides us with that leg to stand on when we want to move forward in our lives, and when we want to develop skills, and when we want to learn and grow in different areas. Academically, we have to think about the schooling that we're receiving. We have to think about how or if we have access to the jobs that we want because of our education. It's no longer acceptable to just have a high school diploma nowadays, but there are so many other opportunities out there for young people like myself, and even older adults who may want to build their career, or they want to bounce back and expand their career. There are so many opportunities out there. And I think that that's what these passages are trying to convey, even though the challenges are there, and even though the research shows us that it can be a roller coaster. It can oftentimes be a roller coaster working in the field of education and learning about the sociology of education and all of the dimensions that go into each and every portion of it. But this passage says that it is for this reason that there have long been campaigns across the U.S. to include ethnic studies courses in middle schools and high schools in order to balance a curriculum otherwise structured by a white colonist worldview. And in fact, sociologists have found that providing ethnic studies courses to students of color who are on the brink of failing out or dropping out of high school effectively re-engages and inspires them. It raises their overall grade point average and improves their academic performance overall. So there are good consequences and bad consequences for everything that we do and everything that we invest our time and energy into. So when we talk about the field of education, and when we talk about the sociology of education, we have to think about how often, or if we are even investing our time and our energy into education for our young people and for our children. And it's not just the parents' responsibility, it takes a village. In order to do this, we all have to work hand in hand to figure out how we can convey this message to the people who are coming up behind us, to the young people who are in the position to be and do whatever they want in this world. So that's what we have to keep in mind when we think about this. Some of the notable sociological studies of education include Learning to Labor, which was made in 1977 by Paul Willis. An ethnographic study set in England focused on the reproduction of the working class within the school system. So that's one example. Another example is Preparing for Power, America's Elite Boarding Schools, which was created in 1987 by Cookson and Purcell. An ethnographic study set at elite boarding schools in the U.S. focused on the reproduction of the social and economic elite. Women Without Class, Girls, Race, and Identity was produced by Julie Betty in 2003, an ethnographic study of how gender, race, and class intersect within the schooling experience to leave some without the cultural capital necessary for social mobility within society. So these are examples of notable sociology studies of education that we can really, really dive deep into once we speak to our professor in about 5 minutes. And the last one is academic profiling, which is a term I personally have never heard of before. But it says that Latinos, Asian Americans, and the achievement gap. This was created by Miss Gilda Ocha in 2013, when an ethnographic study was done within a California high school of how race, class, and gender intersect produce to produce the achievement gap between Latinos and Asian Americans. So again, we have to look at this from a broad point of view. And since he is sitting here, I'm going to add him to the stream and welcome Professor Dann Malihom to the broadcast. Again, this is my very first time featuring a professor on my show. Professor, I'm really glad that you had an opportunity to appear on the Beauty and Us radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I took the course with you last fall, the Sociology of Education, and I really, really enjoyed that course. But I find that a lot of people don't understand the ins and outs of that course because they understand what education is, they understand what sociology is, but they don't really understand how abstract everything is and how it requires you to really think outside the box. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do at UMBC within the sociology department?
Hi, great. Yeah, thank you for having me on here, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad you're spreading this information out to other people. My name is Dann Malihom, as pointed out. My master's is in applied sociology, so I study immigrants, and my thesis was on the educational attainment of first and second generation immigrants. At UMBC, I teach social stratification, looking at inequality, and I teach sociology of education. Social stratification is a course that we commonly hold as a kind of a core elective, but sociology of education is something that I actually brought back. It was offered a while ago when I was an undergrad, but then there was nobody to take it on. So when I had the opportunity to start teaching and kind of create my own courses, I really felt a good time to bring back the sociology of education.
Yes, absolutely. So could you just give everybody an overview of what the Sociology of Education course entails? Because I don't think it's offered at every single university. I don't think that every single university or even a private college gives students an opportunity to learn about the sociology of education. I mean, whether they're sociology majors, whether they're pursuing careers in education. I think that after I took that course last fall, it definitely helped me understand that it goes hand in hand. Sociology and education, that course made me realize that it goes hand in hand when we think about where we are and where we're trying to go within our school systems and in the world of education for our young people, for everyone, not just students, but also for parents and educators who are working together, administrators, people who are within the community and who want to prosper. So could you give us an overview of like some of the things that someone could learn about if they're interested in taking this course, or if they just say, listen, I'm not sure what this is. I'm not sure what sociology is. I'm not sure what education is. How could you explain that to someone who's completely new or oblivious to sociology and to the world of education?
So education, especially in the United States, but worldwide, it's a social institution. It is something that is compulsory. We have compulsory public schools. We have had since essentially the early 19th century. And it is a socialization entity. What I mean by that is just like religion, culture, gender, race, it is a social construct. So it is nothing that's biological or innate, even though we tend to think things are. But instead, it's still, as you mentioned earlier, it's an abstract. It's something that's amorphous, but it's still very real. Like we talk about gender being a social construct, or race being a social construct. There's nothing there biologically to say one race is this versus another one. But what we as a society, what we as a people have kind of created, these labels, these inequalities, these differences, has very real impact. And education is just another form of that. It's something that most Americans will spend at least 12, if not 16, if not more years of their lives involved with, 5 days a week, 9-10 months out of the year. And it shapes us as individuals, it shapes us culturally, and it shapes how we view the world. So a lot of it is based on what we're told or what we're not told. And even beyond that, beyond the actual academics and the credentials, there's a concept called the hidden curriculum, which is this idea of how schools are structured, how policies are enforced. The way we tend to do things also frames how we view the world. So it's not just about the content in the textbooks, but it's the school, the administration, the teachers themselves that shape us.
Yes, absolutely. And I can definitely understand that because, after taking the course, I was able to realize how there are different components to, a conversation about education and what it entails. And I know that, again, it's not just about, what goes on in the classroom. It's not just about the students. It's not just about parents of the students. It's not just about the teachers, but it's about everybody, because everyone's affected by the field of education, the world of education, the school systems. Everybody's affected because everybody plays a role. Everybody plays a part into the breakdown or the makeup of the world of education, because everyone is able to learn from or teach what was taught to them while they grew up or while they were going through that schooling process. I mean, even when we think about early childhood education, and then we think about the later years in elementary school, middle school, high school, and even in college, like the things that we learn and some of the things that we carry and some of the things that we leave behind. It's definitely interesting, because I don't think a lot of people I don't think people in general have an understanding of what that looks like, because people are just going through school, doing their homework, doing their classwork, doing what their teachers or their instructors assign them, but they're not really thinking about how they're being affected by it in the long run, or how it's going to affect them in the long run, or what they're going to learn from it. They just do it because they think that's what they're supposed to do, but they don't really think about what that's going to do for them in the long run. So I think that it's important for people to understand that this course is not just for people who are pursuing a career in education or sociology. It's important for everyone to understand, because everybody can learn something from this course. So what inspired you to become an educator and say, I want to teach the sociology of education, or I want to teach social stratification? What inspired you to do that? Because there are many different areas, social issues. We have marriage and family, we have law, we have healthcare. So what made you choose this path?
For me, I didn't realize until late in my undergraduate career that I wanted to teach. It was one of those things, like I have had tutored since I was in middle school. I worked for Kaplan for test prep for a while, but it was just one of those things like, oh, it's just a thing to do. And then at some point in college, I was like, oh, I like being able to relate things to people. I realized with like SAT prep, I was teaching students and I was finding ways to connect the information to them, because I think a lot of the stuff, it's tough for students to see something like math or science or literature or history and then realize how does that impact them in their day-to-day lives. So I like making those connections for people. And just the idea of being a teacher. My philosophy teacher in high school on one of our retreats shared this quote, which is, you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in a seed. And I just like that idea of, you don't know whose lives you're impacting and then what impact that individual will have on the world, which leads into why I chose sociology. And I talk about in both my classes in social stratification and sociology of education, it's a somewhat pessimistic view of mine, but it's difficult to change older individuals' thought processes. Like there's this concept in psychology called fluid intelligence, and we tend to lose that as we get into our late 20s, and essentially just means that we become more and more rigid in our thoughts unless something directly impacts us. So you see this with LGBT rights, you see this with race relations. It's hard for people to unlearn things. So from my perspective, I want to improve the world by basically preparing the next generation and making sure they're aware of the inequalities that are in the world, making sure they're aware of how these systems influence us. Like these things aren't necessarily all negative. They don't necessarily have all bad consequences, but they are systems that are in place. They are social constructs that directly influence us. So that's kind of why I've chosen stratification and education. I've also, I've studied race, I've studied immigrants, and studied gender, and recognizing that all of these things play a factor in impacting our lives. Sorry, my son is next to us.
Yes, I definitely understand that because I've taken several sociology courses during my time at UMBC, because I've taken marriage and family, the sociology of education, the sociology of law, so I'm able to understand the difference, and I'm able to see how I'm impacted by all of these areas as I study them, and how they affect others, and even people within the community that I do identify with every single day. So I think that it's suffice it to say that a lot of educators have faced a lot of challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic, trying to teach these lessons to a lot of their students, in a hybrid model, in an online and remote environment. So what does that look like for you, between when this pandemic started and where we all are now, in terms of just trying to make sure that you can still feed the knowledge and the resources to the students in the same fashion, just in a different method, to just teach them the same curriculum, and just to provide them with all of the same resources so that they can be successful, and so that they can take this knowledge with them wherever they go and with whatever they pursue.
It has to do with what I was saying earlier about kind of connecting the information, connecting the knowledge to things that are applicable to the individual. So when I teach social stratification, a lot of that talks about socioeconomic status and job opportunities and tax policies and things like that. And that's, I don't say easy, but there's always something happening in the news. Our current state of politics in the country, there's always something relevant to the middle class versus the upper class and whatnot. So I can easily show real life examples. And while it was very difficult, and it's still, an adjustment with this COVID situation, it became a great opportunity to show different examples, show the disparities that exist in education, show that the people who have access to certain technologies are going to have advantages. And that's been exacerbated by the COVID environment and by the virtual environment. So for me personally, I try to work to accommodate and recognize those difficulties. So my wife is a teacher at a Title I school, so I'm aware of the difficulties in trying to get devices for all of those students. So we recognize, we have to go virtual. The assumption is then that if people have those devices, but not everybody has those devices. Not everybody has access to consistent Wi-Fi. Not everybody has a space in their home, as my son makes noise in the background, to do work in peace and quiet. So I did my best to try to be accommodating of that and use as an example of these differences that we don't necessarily consider. We only are usually aware, I talk about there's one reality, but everybody has their own personal truth. And nobody's personal truth is necessarily wrong or invalidated. I never want to invalidate somebody's emotions, but I always talk about, we need to look at statistics. We need to look at the broader numbers. So just because somebody didn't have difficulty during COVID, during virtual learning, maybe they prospered. Some students were able to find time to focus on asynchronous learning. They were able to pick up extra hours at their job. It was better for them, maybe social anxiety wise, to be behind a camera than it is to be in person. But that's not everybody's experiences. So I try to accommodate and use those examples and have students share their experiences. This semester, I'm doing a hybrid in person and hold on, kiddo.
Well, I think that it's important to understand that you have to demonstrate flexibility as an educator, because everybody may not be in the position to learn. Everybody has a different learning style, and I think that that's what people have learned, who work in the field of education. I think that we have to remember that everybody has to. I think it's beneficial for educators to demonstrate flexibility, and I think that that's what this pandemic has showed us, because it's brought every single person out of their comfort zone, and it's forced them to open up, and it's forced them to go about their lives differently, and not just their lives, but in terms of the teaching style. People who were accustomed to being very rigid in their teaching style had to had no choice but to, break out of that and figure out different ways to facilitate their lessons, make it creative, make it engaging. And I think that it's definitely, it's made or break, it's broken or made a lot of people. So I think this pandemic was kind of like a blessing and a curse for a lot of people, because a lot of people benefited from it, but a lot of people, to everybody, a lot of people, they didn't really know how to handle it. And I think that when we watch the news and when we see like the performances in terms of where kids are and where they're going, I think that, an educator's teaching style and what they've brought to the table and what kind of knowledge they've fed, I think that speaks for itself. So what are some, why is it important for communities around the world to understand the concepts that are related to this course? So why is it important for people to learn from this course, and what kind of benefits can someone get from, when they enter into the course and when they come out on the other side of it? What are some of the benefits and advantages can they have when they as they pursue a career in sociology? Because it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of research, it's a lot of writing, and everybody's not able to handle that. So what is your advice for someone who is pursuing a field like this, or someone who is trying to figure out where their place is in terms of what they want to study?
So one of the things I always try to impact on my students is the concept of why. Like, ask why. There's so many things that we take for granted. There's this concept in sociology of the traditional authority, and it's just this idea of that's the way things have always been, that's just the way they are, and we assume they're that way for a reason. Sometimes they are, sometimes those are discriminatory reasons, and sometimes they aren't. It's just the way that things worked out, and nobody thought to change them or to question them and to kind of work to improve the system. So when it comes to the sociology of education, I always want to tell my students and any individuals to question why we have the structures in the place that we do, or to at least try to look from somebody else's perspective. There's this concept, the sociological imagination, which is basically, it's essentially empathy. It's looking at the world from somebody else's perspective and seeing how their intersectionality, their gender, their race, their ethnicity, religion, how that might impact their viewership or their perspective of the world. And it's things that we might never consider if it never impacted us. Like one of the things I always talk about with like the hidden curriculum, you see improvements now in room design and desk design, but in older lecture halls, you have a handful of desks are left-handed desks and the majority are right-handed. And true, that's how the ratios often break down. But in a situation where if there's more left-handed students than average, one of those is going to be stuck at a right-handed desk, and then that's going to be disrupting their interaction in class. They're going to be so focused on trying to figure out how to write in the desk properly, or that, if there's varying body types, a lot of those desks are rigid and you can't adjust it. And if you're uncomfortable, you're having issues with the seat for any number of reasons, it's going to detract from your experience in education. Likewise, like when you're talking about different learning styles in this virtual environment, for some students it worked better, for some students it was worse. And for some teachers too, there's a lot of teachers who are stuck in their ways and they just try to figure out how to migrate their course exactly as it was online. And it was just them talking to a camera, and there's not the engagement, or they haven't figured out a way to integrate, quizzes or tests or whatever. And that does a disservice to the students because it doesn't accommodate, it doesn't ensure equity. It's basically a focus on, I'm going to do a one size fit all situation. I think there are ways to move towards not one size fit all, but covering all demographics, covering all, increasing accessibility, essentially, like making sure that the things that we have in place, the policies, the physical structures, the rules, that they sort of allow as many people to participate in education, because I think education is obviously very important, to the best degree that there as possible. We have this idea of the meritocracy in the United States and in many places, that those who work the hardest achieve the most. And the reality is that's not always the case. Some of it's luck, some of it's socioeconomic status and background. It's what family you're born into, what zip code you're born in. So I think we should try to get to a point where that can be true. We need to try to remove as many barriers as possible. And to remove the barriers, you have to be aware of the barriers. So that's, I think, the importance of sociology of education, or any field really, is recognizing these problems so that we can then address the problems.
Yes, yes, and that's very, very great, and it's very, very important for everybody to understand, because again, like you said, this virtual learning environment has really either made or break a lot of people because, everybody's so accustomed to doing things the way they do things and having that specific structure that they've trained themselves to become accustomed to. But this pandemic has forced them to open up their mind to new ways of learning and to new ways of teaching. And again, everybody, was not happy about the virtual environment, but now that the pandemic has eased, and now that it's loosened restrictions, I think that people are um, in a much better space mentally, and not just with their studies or with their academics, but also mentally and emotionally. I think there are more people that are in a better space because we weren't where we are, we aren't where we are now, where we were last year around this time, and we've still been able to make progress in terms of getting back to some sense of normalcy. I mean, like UMBC, a lot of us are still online, but some of us have went into the classrooms for the first time, you know, in like a year, and people having a chance to interact with one another is something that, a lot of people missed, because talking to a camera, of course, is not the same as actually engaging with others, having conversations with others, speaking with people, working with people, and even like with assignments, everybody has to kind of do things at their own pace, and nobody's really there to grab someone's hand and say, listen, can you look at this for me, or can you help me with this? So everybody's still kind of left on their own to teach for themselves, even like in a virtual environment. It's not the same as actually being in person and actually going to someone and asking for help, showing them what you've written or what you need help with or what you want to read. So I find that, I definitely see that with a lot of like my peers and a lot of my classmates. So what are some of the challenges that you faced in order to build a career in sociology? Because, it requires a lot of research, a lot of reading and writing. So what are some of the challenges that you faced in order to become, a sociology professor? So what are some of the hurdles that you had to jump over, or what are some of the obstacles that you had to go through in order to get to where you are today?
Like you said, it's a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of writing. It's really about finding what you're passionate about. It's finding your purpose in it. In sociology, there's kind of three levels of inquiry. The first is description, basically just saying, what is the state of the world? What are demographics? What are numbers? Things like that. And then there's explanation, which is looking at why are the ratios, like how many, like X percentage of people are living in poverty, like, well, why, and trying to figure out these explanations of the demographics that we determined in the description. And then the last stage is prescription, and that's where you actually start to have policy change, or at least policy suggestions, and research that has a purpose, or at least what I consider to have a purpose. And it's looking at the things in the world that you're passionate about, or the things that you think need to be changed or improved, and working towards that. So like that's the biggest challenge, is finding those things. And sometimes it can be, for lack of a better term, depressing. It can be demoralizing. Like you see these inequalities, you see sometimes hatred or distrust or any number of things in the world. And when you look at it from a very descriptive point of view, like you look at the numbers, you're like, this is just cold hard statistics. The world can be pretty terrible sometimes. So it's a matter of recognizing, like I was saying earlier about with the next generation, like my hope, what kind of keeps me doing this, is recognizing that we can change. This isn't just set in stone. This is not innate human characteristics. It's just the way that society is structured now and the way we've been socialized to think, but that can change. So I think if we, gather this information, we recognize where the issues are, where the inequalities are, it's kind of the motivating factor, is to like, okay, yes, things can be rough. The world isn't as great as it could be, but it still could be better. So like that's kind of the challenge, and the motivation is to fix the issues.
Yes, yes, it's definitely important to understand what the challenges are, because the whole purpose of actually taking a course like this, as well as the other sociology courses, is to figure out where we are and where we're trying to go. So I think that that's really important for people to understand, because people, a lot of people, when they see something interesting, or when they want, they see someone, where they are in terms of what they've studied and how they've built their careers off of their research, and how they've been able to write books, and how they've been able to, because I know a lot of sociologists who've written books and who've done a lot of research. Some of our professors, they've written books, they've collaborated with other authors, and they've written fantastic books about different fields, whether it's health and wellness, whether it's about race, whether it's about education, marriage and family, crime and poverty. Like, I know a lot of talented people who know how to take the research and know how to incorporate it into a book in writing, and they know how to convey that to others. But a lot of people, they don't understand the work that actually goes into doing all of this research, and creating these theories and putting them on paper, because sometimes it can be very hard to put the pieces to the puzzle together when you're trying to figure out why things are the way they are, and when you're trying to figure out how to get from A to Z. And I think that people have to understand that, because people sometimes want to jump on a bandwagon, but they don't really understand what it takes in order to actually get there, and to be successful at that. Because it can be challenging at times. It's not always about just reading cool stuff, or just learning about what's going on in the world. It's actually about digging deep and taking your passion and actually cultivating that into something great. So my last question, before I wrap up the interview, my last question is, what advice would you give to a young person who's in college? Because I know earlier in the interview you said that this is something that you were drawn to because you were trying to figure out how to make a change, how to be a change, and how to make a career out of that. And you talk a lot about how sociology gave you an opportunity. It provided you with an outlet in order to make that change and to make that difference. And even as an educator with your students, giving them these lessons that you teach them within these courses, and helping them stay motivated, and giving them an opportunity to carry that with them. So what is your advice to someone who's first starting college, or someone who may be in high school and who may be thinking about pursuing a career in this field, and they may not be sure what to pursue or how to go about it? What are some of the biggest takeaways, I should say, from you pursuing what you're pursuing, and helping someone who may not understand where to go or how to pursue this field?
I think it's about figuring out what motivates you. For some people, that's financial things. For other people, it's more kind of unspoken value, contributions to community, things like that, or just the discovery of knowledge. So I would say that the two things to be aware of are the applicability of pretty much all sociology. Like, we humans are social creatures. Like, we live in society. So unless you are by yourself in the woods and not interacting with any kind of community, you are partaking in society, and there is going to have impacts in one way or another. The other side of it is kind of also go back to the previous question. It's not always glamorous. So you're not entering sociology to become some celebrity or some high impact individual. And research can be really boring. When you're collecting data, you're going to have people who don't want to participate in your study. When you're analyzing the data, you're coding the data for analysis. It can get really boring, really repetitive, but it's very important, because while I said, a lot of this is driven by hope and kind of individual truths, you can't have emotion when it comes to the statistics. Statistics can be manipulated. Statistics are how you can convince people for positive or negative, but you can't alter the data beyond what is there. So that's one of the things to kind of recognize, is you need to divest yourself, because sometimes you'll find information that doesn't support your initial thesis. And unfortunately, the system is structured where universities and places like that don't like no findings. They want to have every study to have some sort of big breakthrough. and then you go back to the drawing board and you find out some more information, or you find some other connection. So like I said, initially it's not really glamorous. It's repetitive. It can be tough, but most policy tends to stem from some sort of statistical evidence or some sort of argument. And then to my earlier point is, finding what drives you. If people, like, I'm not going to shame somebody for being interested in financial gain. And a lot of CTOs, so chief technical officers in big corporations, have an arts and humanities or social science background. So even though they are the technical officer, they themselves might not be, waist deep in the programming, the computer science and whatnot. You need to have people who can analyze these situations and figure out how to apply this information. You need to be able to take the connections that the programmers and the designers create and figure out, well, how does it apply to life? Everything from Twitter to Facebook or Apple products, none of them are that groundbreaking in terms of idea, but it's about application, or it's about seeing that opportunity and recognizing a need in a population. So like, we didn't need Twitter per se, but we found a use for it, and now it's a huge company. Same thing with Apple or YouTube and stuff like that. Like, place to upload videos is a strange thing. It's like, why do we need that? But then now it's I'm assuming it's a $1 billion industry, and how many people have made careers out of YouTube as content creators. So it's that recognition of the ways that we as a society interact, the things that we desire, the ways that we benefit from it. So, marketing, product research, stuff like that. Like, that's all sociology. That's all human psychology and sociology. So there are ways that you might not think of. Hold on, bud. That sociology impacts our lives. It's just a matter of taking a look at it. And like, it's the question, why? Like, why are things the way they are? And you might find a sociological reason that explains it.
Yes, and that's really great. And thanks so much again for appearing on the BDNS radio right here on Awesome Guy Radio. I thank your son for joining on our conversation too. And this was a really great discussion. It was very informative. So how can people reach out to you if they're interested in enrolling in this course and learning more about the sociology of education or social stratification, because you teach both?
My email address is dan.malihom@umbc.edu. I'm always more than happy to discuss these things. Like, I'm a teacher for obvious reasons that this is stuff I'm passionate about, and I could sit in front of a class for hours and just talk about these things and connect them to the world. So I'm more than happy to respond to emails, share information, provide insights, whether it's my two areas, like I said, of stratification and education, or just to provide insights on how other areas, so crime and punishment, criminology, medical sociology, like there's lots of different areas and things that, like I said, you might not realize that sociology impacts, but it does.
Yes, well, I'm going to let you go, but again, thank you again for appearing on my show. And thanks again for informing everybody about this. This was a really riveting conversation, but it was very informative for a lot of people who needed a much more clear understanding of this whole entire course and just this whole world that a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to explore. So thanks again for appearing on my show. So I'm going to let you go now as I close out the show, but thanks again.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad you thought of me, and it was enjoyable having you having you in my class, and I look forward to all the good things that you'll do.
Thanks again, Professor.
All right. Take care.
You too. So that wraps up another edition of the BDNS Radio right here on Awesome Guide Radio. So I'm your host, Nelson E. Brown, and I'm glad you all had the opportunity to listen to this riveting conversation and this informative discussion about the sociology of education. So again, this was my very first time featuring my professor from UMBC and from college in general on my show. So I hope you guys have an opportunity to dig deep and to learn more about this course and to learn more about this field, because it's so fascinating. So again, just as a reminder before we close out the show, next week on Tuesday, November 23rd of 2021, I will not be here. So I'm taking a break next week for Thanksgiving week. So I'm going to be off next week. So I'm going to be on a hiatus next week. So don't hop on here because I won't be here. So don't forget to just enjoy the time that you have with your family. I think that this year we are in a position where we can definitely enjoy our family, the presence of each other, and with safety precautions, of course. But I hope you all have the opportunity to enjoy your families and to enjoy this holiday season as we all get bundled up for the fall. We're smack dab in the middle of the fall as we still continue to recover from a pandemic and as we continue to navigate our ways through these difficult times. Don't forget to subscribe to Awesome Guide Radio on all of the social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it. We're on all of them. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns, or if you want to see something great on the show that one of us hasn't done, please feel free to reach out to us. We're available on all of the social media platforms: IG, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. All of the social media platforms, we're all available 24/7. So stay tuned. So after next week, so you'll be hearing from me on November 30th, 2021 from 6 to 7 p.m. So that's when I will be back for another show. And I will keep you guys posted about what to expect. So take care, stay safe. I love you guys. I appreciate you all, and have a great holiday break. I hope you all have a great time with your families, with your friends, and as you guys celebrate each other. So take care.